Welcome and good morning.
Good morning to all of you. I don't know how many are tuned in, but you're all very welcome. And I'm delighted to be able to speak to you as someone who also went to a state school and share my experiences, good and bad, about how I scrambled up the broadcasting ladder, which is not an easy one to do. And even if you're not interested in broadcasting, if you want to get into something that is tricky to get into, I think there might be lessons learned here as well. Let me start by saying that broadcasting is my fourth career. So if you think you have to go straight into what you want to do, your dream career, you don't. And often building up life experiences elsewhere is very, very valuable. I used to sell medium density fiberboard, MDF, in the Netherlands. I used to own a chain of pubs in Germany in the 1990s. I ran a local development organization in County Wicklow in Ireland, and I hated that. And all the while, I wanted to be a broadcaster. I was very lucky that it kind of runs in the family. My father was a correspondent for the Irish national broadcaster RTE. He was the show jumping correspondent. You guys are too young to remember when show jumping and snooker were the main sports on national terrestrial television. And I did a broadcast postgrad. I did a business degree, a BCom in University College Dublin, and then I did a postgrad in journalism and broadcasting to give me a kind of a firm footing in media law and to get me into what it was like to broadcast. And I can tell you that it is not an easy profession to get into, especially if you aspire to work at the top echelons in it. And the theme of my talk today will be how to handle rejection, because you will be told no. You will be told not this time. You will be told it's not right for you. You will even be told to go away and consider a different career. Um, and it's how you handle that rejection that will be the makings of you or not. It's how you deal with being told no that is very important throughout your life. And I'd like to think that I went around problems rather than, you know, take a no and then turn my back and walk away. So I did my broadcast postgrad, and then I went into the pub business in Germany because it was a booming industry at the time in the mid 1990s. And even though I enjoyed it, it was quite stressful because it was an all cash business. I spoke German, which means I had to do all the business side in the mornings and then work late to prevent any mass theft of cash from the business. Um, so I came back from Germany in 1998 and I said, I really want to get into this broadcasting lark. And I offered my services for free to a number of online radio stations. Tech TV, in fact, was the name. Even though it says Tech TV, there was a radio element to that. Um, and I had been broadcasting on a local radio station in Ireland called Anna Livia, and I did my weekly show at Issue, which was a kind of a discussion program, and unpaid, of course. And I contacted these American broadcasters and cheekily said, I am a technology expert, a technology correspondent. This is in the 1990s, which was during the dot-com boom. And everyone was scrambling to get technology uh, output, technology knowledge on air, in print, whatever it was. Online, of course, was developing rapidly at that time. And so they took me on, and I did about a month and a half, maybe 2 months of free broadcasts for these American broadcasters, tech TV radio. And then I told a porky pie, which does happen. Does happen. I don't encourage people to lie, but it does happen when people embellish stuff. I told them that Bloomberg were interested in hiring me, which wasn't exactly true. I was talking to Bloomberg, but they hadn't offered me any job, and I would need to get paid. And then the Americans said, okay, well, we value what you're doing. We value your knowledge. We value your broadcast skills. We will start paying you. And so they started paying me. And in the meantime, I was writing for national newspapers in Ireland and contributing as often as I could. And then I spotted an advert in the Guardian, Media Guardian website, looking for a broadcast journalist. Now, broadcast journalist sounds senior enough, but in BBC terms, it is very junior. Not the most junior, but one of the most junior. And even though I was broadcasting regularly in Ireland and had a bit of experience, to take a leap forward, you do need to take a step back. And so I applied in hope rather than expectation, because I presumed that these jobs were already filled out well in advance, that someone had already been tapped on the shoulder and they were going through the motions of publicly advertising for a job that they had no intention to give to a total outsider with no television experience. I applied in January 2001, and in the end of January 2001, I was called, amazingly, shockingly, to London, to Television Centre, for an interview for that job. I did do interview preparation. I even did a course, a day-long course in how to get that job, how to get that interview. That's how serious I took it. So I prepared as good, as well as I possibly could, but I didn't have television experience. I had lived in Germany and the Netherlands and Ireland, and I didn't know the full gambit or the full slew of BBC output. And so I thought the interview was an utter disaster. In fact, I blogged about it on my website. What I described as a car crash interview. Um, but I did the interview. I did what I thought was a dreadful interview. I went away and told no one. I told no one that I even went for the interview, other than my sister, who was living in London, and I stayed on her sofa. I didn't tell my family, didn't tell my friends, I didn't tell my then girlfriend, because I thought it was a total wasted exercise. I didn't want anyone to be even me asking me about the interview with the BBC, lest they get their hopes up or I get my hopes up, because I thought I had bombed. So on Valentine's Day 2001, the 14th of February, I got a call from the guy that performed the interview, a guy called Peter Eustace, whose name will crop up later on in this chat. And he offered me a 6-month contract. And I remember the whole left side of my body fainting, because I was so shocked that I got a job, even for 6 months. So I moved locked, stock, and barrel from Ireland, and I had a mortgage, I had a house, I had to let it out, and this was the dream job for me. My first cousin, once removed, kind of like an uncle, is a very famous broadcaster that some of you may have heard of, called Des Lynam. He used to present BBC Grandstand. He was unable to help me. Well, unable or unwilling, I'm not sure. Though I did ask for his assistance, and he said, it doesn't work like that in the BBC. You can't just place people that you know within the organization. So I didn't even tell him that I'd got this job. So I started at the bottom of the ladder in the BBC. I was working on the breakfast program, which is still running today on BBC One, and I'd never worked in television. I remember seeing in the gallery. The gallery is basically the main control room, where all the big decisions are taken, and the vision mixer and the sound mixer and the director and the editor all sit. And I remember watching and said, wow, I am going to struggle here. There's so much stuff to know, and it's all about timings and all about coming up. And my job was so junior. I was what's called a meet and greet. The Americans call it pump and grin. My job was to meet guests who were coming on the show, bring them up to the green room where they stand by, I give them a cup of tea or coffee and offer them a newspaper. Back in the days when there was no online newspapers, it was all physical newspapers. And they would stand by, and then I would bring them onto the studio floor to make sure that they arrived safe and sound. It was the lowest rung of the ladder, but you have to start somewhere. And that is a very important life lesson as well, that you must start somewhere. And I did that for a while. And then one occasion, about 9 months into my stint with the BBC, there was a breaking story overnight in the Financial Times, and I was working overnight. So working from like 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., which is absolutely normal if you're working on a breakfast TV program, because you've got to prepare and edit the tapes and write scripts and prepare briefs for the presenter and all that stuff. So a story broke in the Financial Times at around 11 p.m., and the output editor, or my overnight boss, said, "Does anyone have broadcast experience here?" to all the producers. And I put up my hand, which wasn't a lie. I'd been presenting on Irish radio for a while. And he said, "Okay, go away, write a script, send me the script, and then you can voice this, as in put your voice to it. No piece to camera, or I wouldn't appear on screen at all, just my voice." So I voiced up this piece. The editor signed off on it, or the overnight editor signed off on it, and it was broadcast on BBC One. It was incredibly exciting for me to hear my voice go out on BBC One, having been watching the channel for 31 years of my 31 years on this earth. And the following day, the same guy who offered me a job, his name is Peter Eustace, I can say his name now, sent a note out to all my colleagues without sending any note to me, saying that Joe Lynam is never to voice anything on the BBC ever again! Exclamation mark. So you can imagine the humiliation when I got wind of this note sent out to all my colleagues. It would be regarded as bullying in the 21st century, or in 2024. But I presume that this was normal, de rigueur, in the world of broadcasting, dog eat dog and all that. And so I had a problem, because he basically was putting an embargo on me ever broadcasting again on the BBC. So this is the start of going around a problem. The BBC, thankfully, is a giant organization with many arms, many wings, many divisions, many streams. So I made it my business to move out of his orbit and into the World Service, which is World Service Radio. And so I applied for a job and got a job as a journalist stroke presenter on the BBC World Service. And so this is up to 2004 now. I'd been with the BBC for 3 years, and I started presenting a program. Well, the business aspect, the business inserts into a program called Europe Today, but also other programs like World Today and all that. And eventually I graduated to presenting the World Today program on the World Service, which is not something you do lightly, because it is a 3-hour program with breaking news from all over the world. And it was very stressful. But when I came back to Television Centre, because these things are always happen in attachments, so you do a set period of time in another division, but you must go back home to your home department, which was back to the orbit of this guy, Peter Eustace. And the moment I arrived back, he didn't want to see nor hear me, and certainly not put me on air. And I spoke to his boss, the head of the business unit. And I said, "Listen, I've been presenting the World Today. I've been doing okay. What are the chances of me doing a tiny bit of TV reporting for business news?" And he said to me, "I don't think it's going to work out for you on television, Joe. I think you should stick to radio, possibly regional radio." Now, when he meant regional radio, he means like Radio Berkshire, or Radio Manchester, or even, the Channel Islands or something like that. He does not mean Radio 4 or BBC Radio 5 Live, or even World Service. So I was in a real bind. So I decided to focus myself on going for a different job also within the business unit, and it was based in Brussels. I speak a number of languages, and I have good business news knowledge. And I, behind the scenes, got my cameraman friends of mine to film a series of piece to camera to show what I'm like on camera, to show that I'm not a rabbit in the headlights. And I gave that to this guy, and he softened his opinion and let me do one or two pieces uh, during the summertime when other correspondents were away on holidays. I applied for and got that job in Brussels, which is a 6-month stint in 2006, and that was the makings of me because I was determined to make a success of it. Britain was in the European Union then, and there were a lot of stories coming out of Brussels. And because I was willing to work hard, I got interviews with more European commissioners than any of my predecessors in their 6-month stint. And I came back, and again, this guy Peter Eustace said, "Well, no, you're back producing. You're back producing overnight. You're off air," and that was very demoralizing. But again, I have to go around the problem, and I saw an opportunity as a weekend correspondent. So when that job became available, I was told that you can do the interview, but it's only for 3 months. So I prepared like crazy for that interview, including giving a mini presentation in the interview about how I thought we could do stuff differently at the weekend. I got the job with a major warning: it's only for 3 months. Don't get too comfortable. And 3 months became 8 years. And as I got the job in 2008, the great financial crisis was happening, was enveloping. Banks were falling like skittles. Bear Stearns collapsed. Then Northern Rock collapsed. And that story was broken by Robert Peston, who is the founder of Speakers for Schools. And I was there at the weekend, and all the bailout talks and rescue talks for the economy and the banks were happening at the weekend. And so I rolled up my sleeves and worked and worked and worked. I was running from studio to studio, running from Five Live to the news channel, and then from there to BBC World TV, and then from there to the bulletins, which is what we call the 1, 6, and 10, the bulletins. And then Radio 4 scripting, and then writing a piece for the website. And I was doing crazy hours. But this was in journalistic terms a war, and you can have an either good war or a bad war. But the main thing you need to do is work hard and be the kind of guy who says yes, especially if you're junior and you want to stay on air and not be booted back down to off air and being a producer. And so I worked very hard. That was rewarded then 2 years later with 2 years on Newsnight as a correspondent. And that was wonderful time. The Eurozone crisis was happening then. Spain, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Cyprus, all going belly up in macroeconomic terms. And they sent me all over Europe to do these stories. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time. I worked with Jeremy Paxman, and I worked with some of the best journalists in the world. And it was my favorite time in the BBC. And then I came back, and I went back to my job the weekend, which I loved because I kind of made it my own. And then I was lucky enough to be offered a stint presenting on the Today program on Radio 4, which you probably don't listen to, but it's the most listened to radio program on British radio. It's news and current affairs between 6 and 9 in the morning. And it's the flagship news program on the BBC. And I can only say I've been very, very lucky with how my career has progressed. But the key, you can be lucky. There's an old phrase in golf, you're getting luckier every time. And he said, yes, the more I practice, the luckier I tend to get. And in everything you do, in life, you will need a modicum of talent, ability. Uh, you will need a modicum of good luck, as in turn a different corner and you won't meet a certain person or you won't try a certain thing. But the key ingredient for me, and this is for all careers, this is for everyone out there who wants to do a tricky career to get into, is perseverance. Perseverance is everything. If you are only half-heartedly pursuing your dream, you're not pursuing your dream at all. So if you want to do something like acting or fashion design or whatever it is that is really difficult to get into, you must persevere with it. You must be able to handle rejection. You mustn't take it personally, even though it may seem very personal at the time, like when I was told I was never going to broadcast on the BBC ever again. And you must try to go around problems. It's a life skill, not just for broadcasting, for everything, to try to process negativity from others. Michelle Obama famously said, when they go low, we go high. In other words, try to stay positive, even if you've just been kicked mentally in the teeth. And I regard myself as very blessed that I had the career I had, but I can thank myself for perseverance. I didn't give up easily, and it's led me to some wonderful places. I was offered a job 3 years ago with Newstalk in Ireland, back where I came from. And it's a wonderful job. I have my own show. I get up early, but I go home early. I get up at 5 a.m., but I walk out of the building at 9 a.m. And I can do with the rest of the day as I see fit, as long as my show is fit and proper and ready to roll the next day. Um, so I'm going to hand over now back to Charlie to ask whether you guys have got any questions, because I mean, I can rabbit on forever, but you guys will have specific concerns. My experience with doing speakers for schools is you're super shy. I don't know, Charlie, whether the students can email or message in or text in their questions or something like that. Because often when it comes to asking a question in front of all their peers, they get super shy. But I'll hand back to Charlie now if you want to kind of take it from there.
Yes, well, we had some questions that were pre-submitted to us from students.
Mm-hmm.
So we can start with those, and hopefully people will start feeling comfortable that they can send them in by the Q&A box. And they can send them in anonymously. You don't have to have your name attached to it or anything like that. So we won't know who they're coming from. You can just ask them at your level of comfort that you like. And we'll start with this one because I think it's really nice. And you sort of touched on it when you were talking about developing your skills and working and your voice. So it's, how do you develop your voice when you're delivering material? Obviously, you don't talk. Like you have a little bit of a difference, right, to when you're having a casual conversation with a friend to when you're on screen. So how do you develop that voice?
It's something I had to think about when I joined the BBC, because obviously I had an Irish accent, probably more pronounced than it is now. And if you're voicing something on Radio 4, you must enunciate your syllables as clearly as possible. And so you do have a think about how you speak. And I certainly did. I think I've come down a few notches in decibel terms. And I've certainly slowed down, because if you met me socially, I'd be spitting out sentences. I speak 10 times quicker off air than I do on air. And that's right. That's normal. You should relax and speak at whatever pace is normal for you when you're away from work. But in any work environment, whether it's broadcasting or acting, wherever it is, you will need to temper your voice to the occasion. And if you're explaining something which is tricky, you definitely need to slow down. And I always encourage people when they're making a presentation or whatever it is to slow down and take pauses. So if you give someone an interesting concept or an idea that they might not have heard of before, pause. Let the sentence sink in. Let someone digest it. Don't spit out loads of facts and hope that people will pick it up, because they won't. So yes, definitely I kind of speak with a slightly lower octave than I might have 25 years ago. That's a normal process, by the way. As you get older, your voice gets deeper, and that's for men and women. But I certainly learned to slow down and how I speak, and to enunciate as best I can, and try to do it without losing your personality, if that's possible, i.e., try to keep the backbone of your personality in check, though make it more understandable to an audience. Like when you're broadcasting for the World Service and most of the audience do not have English as a mother tongue, then you've got to be slow, you've got to be clear, and maybe try to avoid jargon, acronyms, phrases which are culturally indiscreet, that kind of stuff, when you're broadcasting. But yes, I do alter my voice when I go online. Sorry, when I go on air. And that's a normal process as part of broadcasting. And if you go behind the scenes in the BBC and you see some people, you will notice that they are different off air. Like Fiona Bruce doesn't speak as slowly as she does off air as she does on air. And same for all major broadcasters. Clive Myrie is a friend of mine, and he certainly swears a lot more off air, put it that way, than he does on air. He's a super guy, except for the fact that he's a Manchester City fan. But apart from that, does that answer your question, Charlie?
It certainly does. So thank you to whoever submitted that one to us. I'm going to ask a follow-up question now, which is, how do you prepare for a broadcast?
Well, it depends on the subject. You should always have notes with you, either digital notes or a physical flashcard. Like when I'm doing a piece to camera, you can hold your phone. Now, phones are great, but make sure you can see the text on it. You must do your research. Like when I come finish this discussion with you guys, I'm doing what's called a two-way or a live insert into the flagship news talk program called the Pat Kenny Show. And I've already done much of my research. I have sent my notes to the producer so that they know roughly an outline of what we're going to talk about, and that they can ask the questions that suit the presenter. But you need to know your material because it's live radio, live television, and the presenter can ask you anything. And sometimes, it's rare, but sometimes the presenter might try to catch you out. And if you can, you need to be able to walk around that problem. So if they throw a question to you which you haven't a clue about, you cannot say, "Oh, I don't know anything about that." You have to say, "Well, that's a very good question. But you know what people are talking about where I'm talking to or where I am? This is what they're talking about." You must quickly deflect if the presenter throws a googly to you that you cannot answer. But yes, you must prepare. Now, it is much easier to prepare these days than it was because the internet has so much information, and you can say, "Well, I only want information between these dates and that dates, and it must include the following word," and all that kind of stuff. So it's 10 times easier than it was 20 years ago, and 100 times easier than it was 30 years ago, before the internet was all pervasive, before Google became a verb. But preparation is everything. You must have little factoids. What I try to do, Charlie, is I try to give what's called takeaways. In other words, the audience will hear something that I've said that maybe they don't know, and they will take it away mentally and chew on it. And that's a valuable asset to have. If the audience can have a takeaway from whatever the discussion is, they can then maybe share that with their friends and family in a discussion later on. So, "Oh, I heard an item on the radio and they were saying that blah, 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 blah. I didn't know that." What I mean? But you can never say on air, "I don't know." It's not a good look, especially if you're putting yourself up as an expert or a correspondent or an editor for whatever you do.
Yeah, I love it. Really, really interesting. Our next question then comes from, well, it's anonymous, but it's around, I believe, and they don't know the name of it either, reading live while you're on TV. So it's, when live on TV, do you read live? And if so, do you get to write or read those scripts beforehand? Or kind of,
Yes,
is that a surprise?
yes, and sometimes yes. I was the business presenter on the news channel, and yes, I always wanted to write my own scripts because if you're going to read out the words, and remember, it's an auto cue, which means the words scroll up, so you got to read at the pace that the scrolling is happening. Now, there is a person, a human being, who does the scroll, the auto cue, but sometimes they're not really focused and they're kind of doing a normal pace, but you might be reading quicker or slower. And sometimes you find yourself chasing the words on the screen. Remember, the words are mapped in front of the lens of the camera, so you can't see on at home what I'm seeing when I look into the lens. It's a giant auto cue right in front of the lens. And you might be able to see my eyes kind of moving across the screen like that. It shouldn't be the case, A good presenter, again, Fiona Bruce, Martine Croxall, Clive Myrie, will kind of read in a zigzag so it looks more natural. But also, they have the backup of a printed version just in case something happens with the auto cue. It happens all the time. The auto cue goes down, the auto cue person is asleep, whatever it is. You have to have the physical backup of the script, which you should write yourself. Because if you're going to read something out on air, it should be in your style and how you read and how you present. Sometimes, though, stories break and the producer will insert stuff and they may or may not bark in your ear because you will have an earpiece saying, "Oh, I've changed that cue. I've changed the cue on the next item." And you have to process what the editor is saying in your ear or what the director is saying in your ear and continue reading on screen and have a demure, calm face when you're doing it. So everyone usually compares news reading to that of a swan. Above the water, it's graceful and elegant, but below the water, they are paddling furiously with their little yellow feet. And that is exactly what happens. And what you do is the more you do it, the more you train your brain to be able to listen to something being said in your ear whilst reading something completely different on the auto cue. The more you do it, the more it becomes doable. At first, it seems impossible. Like when you do it for the first time, you want as little interference as possible. You want to focus on the words on the auto cue, which are scrolling at a certain pace above you, and you don't want any distractions. But the more experience you get, the more you want to know what's going on. You don't want to know what the next item is ready. So you don't mind, and you can kind of subliminally listen and read at the same time. But again, it's all about perseverance. You keep doing something, the better you'll get at it.
As a follow-up question to that then, because I know some of our viewers watching might be going, well, what do I do if I want to practice that? Do you have any suggestions of what our young people might be able to do? Obviously, they don't have access to all the equipment and things like auto cues. How else could they try and replicate what it's like live on air in their homes or schools if they want to have a practice?
Well, I would be I don't, unless I'm mistaken, there are auto cue apps where you can put a text into it and it will scroll. I would be surprised if there isn't one like that. That is what you should do. You stack it up against your laptop or whatever it is and tell it to scroll, and you can say how many words a second it should scroll. I've seen them, and I would then practice that, send text to your phone, read it out, and then deliberately maybe ask your brother or your friend or your sister or whatever it is to try to distract you. In other words, you've got your app, and when you're reading words, when you got your in front of the camera, and then you don't know when they might come in and they might shout at you, they might say something, and you have to process and handle that. That is what broadcasters need to do. Correspondents, when they're in the field, I can't tell you how many times I've been doing lives outside banks in the street, and some idiot will, walk in front of the camera or gesticulate behind you and all that. And you may or may not see that person behind you. And they may be doing all sorts of gestures behind you. And you have to keep going. And it's up to the director who can see to say, okay, there's an idiot behind you, ignore him, or go back to the studio, or hand back, or whatever it is, or move the camera, or something like that. Um, but it's a fraught business. When you're out on the street, you'll always get some idiot who thinks it's funny to distract you, even though you're trying to do your job. And if someone comes up to you and you're about to do a live into the 6 o'clock news, and they say, "Oh, where's this for?" And just to throw them off the scent, I always say, "Oh, this is just for a training course," and they're not interested. Once it's a job. Whereas if you said, "This is live into the 6 o'clock news, 8 million people will see this," that idiot is not going to go anywhere. He's going to hang around and make his gesticulations and say, "Oh, I'm on the telly, mum," and all that kind of stuff. So that's my get out of jail free card. I'm doing a training video, even if you're doing a national broadcast.
Interesting. I love it. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions before we have to look at ending to today's session. So we'll go with this one for our potential last one, which is how do you really engage with your audience through a screen?
Oh, it's really, it's that's an art form, and I don't think I'm as good at it at all as others. Again, Clive Myrie is so good. He seems to radiate empathy and relatability through the screen, and it's something that doesn't come naturally to some people, and they have to learn it, and they have to relearn it, and they have to persevere with it. Just look at some of your favorite broadcasters and say to yourself, why do I like them? What is it about them that I like? Look at Graham Norton. He's just a genius in how he does. He makes you feel as if you're just having a coffee in Starbucks together. He makes everyone feel relaxed. Newsreaders, of course, they're reading serious material, so they need to have an appropriate expression. So if you're about to read an item about people being killed in a road traffic accident, you can't be grinning. And if you're reading an item about chocolate prices going up, you can grin and you can say, you know, or gesticulate in some way, shape, or form. Watch the people that you think are good at it. I've just listed off a few people that I think are brilliant at it. I've worked with some of the best, like Jeremy Paxman. Some of you may know him. He was a legend. Um, he had a permanently jaundiced look, as in, oh my God, this politician's lying to me. Why is he lying to me? So I have to put up with this nonsense. And again, Clive Myrie, Martine Croxall, excellent. Hugh Edwards, really good. All these people are really, really talented.
Great. So, as we look towards ending today's session, then, do you have any final thoughts and feelings that you'd like to share with our viewers, or any kind of key takeaways that you'd like them to leave today's session and to think about?
At the risk of repeating myself, please learn to process rejection because you will get it, not just in broadcasting, in every line of work you want to do, especially if it's a tricky line of work you want to get into. Go around the problem. Step back and say, right, if I want to get from A to B, but there's a wall in the way, how do I get around the wall? Maybe I need to take 2 steps to the side, do something slightly different, and then come back in to get to B. Maybe there are 2 or 3 job moves you need to make before you make your dream job move. But be prepared for people to say no. And they might say it in a very undiplomatic way. It's less likely now in 2024 than the undiplomatic way that I was told back in the day. But be prepared to hear the word no, and be prepared to think strategically about where you want to go. Always try to think 2 or 3 moves into the future. Even if you think 3 years is a lifetime, it's not. If you wish to get into your dream job, and persevere, keep knocking on the door.
Well, Joe, thank you for joining us. It's been really lovely having you on. And I think we've gained some really good insights into what it's like to have a career in journalism and how you can switch and turn and also move into it later on as well. It doesn't have to be the first thing you do when you leave school or university or college. So it's been really interesting having you on, and thank you for sharing such personal insights with us today.
Thank you very much. Best of luck to all of you.